الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We continue inshallah ta'ala with كتاب المعاملات, transactions from the book of Akhsar and Mokhtasarat, and we are still in the chapter of Al-Khiyar, the subject of the seven types of Al-Khiyar, and that is to choose whether to continue the transaction or not. And again, as a reminder, the mutun or the words of the ulama in any subject, it requires for the person to put effort, and it's meant to be that way. But it's very precise. Is every word, there's a reason for it to be there. So it's important that we don't miss a word in the matan, especially that we're going through the Arabic one word after the other, to also have an idea or to get introduced to the language of al-fiqh and to the language of knowledge in general, which is the Arabic language. So that's why, inshallah, it requires patience and working into making sure that everything is clear in its basic form. Again, we're not intended by this is to grasp every matter in the different transactions, but just the basics and the foundations of this, that we can able to relate everything back to it. So therefore, inshallah, if you have any questions, we keep it to the end, inshallah, unless there's a word that's not clear or something. So not the situations that people face in their worldly life. So we stopped at number 4, correct? We took the first 3 when he said وَالْخِيَارُ سَبْعَةُ أَقْسَامٍ, الخيار 7 types. خيار مجلس, if you follow inshallah ta'ala, just read it once, the ones that we took before. خيار مجلس فالمتبايعان بالخيار ما لم يتفرقا بأبدانهما عرفا. That's خيار المجلس, the خيار in the majlis. Can someone go to the children just because they're going to start the game upstairs? It's just to tell them not to hit the wall, that's all. جزاك الله خير. I'll wait for you. طيب خيار مجلس, that's the خيار of the majlis, as long as they don't depart. وخيار شرط, and these are the most common 2 types of choices that people would have in the contracts, which is the shart. That means if a person have a condition to when he can return merchandise, whether it's by time or so, then this is also for both the buyer and the seller. And al-hila is haram, which is playing tricks or lying or hiding something. All of that is not permissible, and it invalidates the contract if it's against it. And the different masail that we read. So after we finish all of it, inshallah ta'ala, we can go back and review if we need to, inshallah. So we stopped at وَخِيَارُ تَدْلِيسٍ. The 4th type of al-khiyar is خيار وخيار تدليس بما يزيد به الثمن. وخيار تدليس بما يزيد به الثمن كتصرية وتسويد شعر جارية. So let's read it, repeat after me inshallah. وخيار تدليس بما يزيد به الثمن كتصرية وتسويد شعر جارية. No. So here this is called خيار تدليس. The choice of, again, what is the meaning of خيار? That means both or one of them, the buyer or the seller, has the choice. This is al-khiyar means, has a choice to break the contract. This is then the khiyar comes after the contract is already been signed and it's supposed to be binding, when is it permissible to break the contract? One of which, if there was tadlis. And a tadlis, you might have heard it in the subject of al-hadith. Fulan mudallis, one of the narrators of the hadith, he is mudallis. Mudallis in the subject of al-hadith have, of course, the same root comes from it, but it has its own definition according to the signs of the hadith. So, but basically, when someone would say that he narrate this hadith from so and so, and that person, he might be living at the same time with him. That means he has the ability to listen to him, but he did not listen to him when it comes to that specific narration, that specific hadith. So when he says an or from so and so, and he heard it from someone else. So that means he's hiding something, as if he's hiding. He's not hiding, he's not lying, but it's not the same as when he have heard it from that person. So that's one of the types of the weak hadith, actually. When the narrator, he allows himself to say this. Like exactly if, for example, I would say, someone, his name is Omar, for example, or and I would say, Omar, Omar said this, and he truly said it, but I didn't hear it from him, but I heard it from Brother Samir, for example. He told me that Omar said this, something like this. But at least here in buying and selling has to do something with deception. So خيار تدليس, that means the tadlis is usually with the merchandise, that a person would hide something and make it not clear or something of that nature. So when we say خيار تدليس, and comes from the difference between the darkness and the light. When things are between dark and light, so things are not completely clear. So a seller, he wants to show that his merchandise is worth more than what it is. So he would, for example, give it a good look, clean it, which is nothing wrong with that, but to hide some of the slight defects in it, to make it seem like it's worth more than what it is. And this is the example that we said, when a person would put the best of the fruits on the top. So it looks like it's an expensive one, but then once you start putting in the balance or so, then there's underneath it is something that is less. So when something like that happened to him, he has the right to return whatever he purchased. And that's why he mentioned some examples. So خيار تدليس بما يزيد به الثمن. So the tadlis specific here is in doing something that makes the price increases. بما يزيد به الثمن. Because there is some deception that can be in increasing the price, but not necessarily something of a defect in the merchandise. And there's something, as it will come, خيار عيب. There's a separate خيار, a separate choice here if there's a defect in the merchandise itself. So here it doesn't have to be necessarily something wrong with it, but he would make it seem like it's worth more when it's not. Right? So for example here, he says وخيار تدليس بما يزيد به الثمن. So he would do something of hiding something or covering something that would increase the price. So as the example here, كتصرية. التصرية is when they used to tie the udder of the goat or the cow or whatever. They would tie it in a specific way so that it collects the milk, so that it doesn't, release the milk, so that when they're selling it, the buyer would see that, mashallah, this cow or this goat or whatever, it gives lots of milk. So that person, he did something to make it seem to look like this. So this is التصرية. And the Prophet ﷺ, he clearly stated in the hadith, لا تصر الإبل والغنم. Do not make that تصرية, which comes from tying something. So do not tie the camels and the goats, meaning the udder of it that carries the milk. Why? Because this is tadlis. You're deceiving. And the like of that can be something else. But the two examples here mentioned كتصرية, and التصرية is mentioned in the hadith and has a specific ruling to it, as it will be mentioned. Now, كتصرية, so kaf is like تصرية. التصرية, this is as we heard. وتسويد شعر جارية. Tasweed is making black the hair of the slave. The Jariya is the slave woman, right? So to dye her hair black so that she looks like she's young and she's not old. And again, do we have to say it again? Why they mention the slaves? Because the slave is a human being. So if everybody can understand what a human being is. But if they mention something, now we have cars. Before they didn't have cars. So if they say a type of fruit or a vegetable or something that not everybody know it in the entire world, people might not understand what he means. Right? So that's why the ulama they use this, because at any time, in any place, people understand the example. Right? Even though if it's not something that is present in their lifetime. So this is tadlis. And then he says, وخيار غبن وخيار غبن وعيب وتدليس على التراخي. So three things here are mentioned. This is not a separate one. This is a specific ruling with regards to these three types. خيار غبن, we took the غبن before. The ghabn, if there is ghabn, that means a major loss that happened as a result of a person selling something with lying or deceiving a person in a way that he would sell him something more expensive than what it is. And we talked about al-ghabn. He said the وخيار غبن وعيب, and if there's a defect, and the defect will come next one, وتدليس. These three things, the tadlis that we just mentioned. And the difference is very clear, as we said. Al-ghabn is when something is beyond the norm of the price of things. Something becomes extremely expensive than the norm of what these goods are sold for, because of the reason that were mentioned before. Aib is a defect in the merchandise, and it will come in the next one. Tadlis is, as we heard, something to increase the price. So they're both kind of having the same issues. So these three things, he says, على التراخي. التراخي is when you make irkha of something, when you have a rope, حبل, and you make it either tight or you make irkha, that means you make it loose. So what is meant here is على التراخي. That means it doesn't have to be an immediate one. What does that mean? If someone was deceived in buying something as a result of ghabn or defect or tadlis, if he comes after a few days or after one day, this is what the at-tarahi means. It doesn't have to be right away. It can be delayed. This is what the meaning of at-tarahi, ala at-tarahi. So if he comes, and some stores, for example, if they say you have the right only to return this merchandise within 3 days, right? But if the problem in the merchandise is because of ghabn or aib or tadlis, even if he comes after 3 days, he has the right to return it. You understand? This is according to the deen. But if the laws of the land is that it's not going to work, then you have to deal with it. But according to the Sharia, if these things, if it's ghabn or aib or tadlis, and of course these things were in the before the contract was done, right? So this something was present in it, but the person didn't realize that has a defect till after the time period where he was able to return it. So it doesn't matter. So this is على التراخي, على التراخي, and this is that means it doesn't have to be set by خيار الشرط, which is the second خيار that we said, where it's limited by time, right? Because we talked before that if they agreed on a month, this is the period, the grace period that he can return the merchandise within the month. But if it because of ghabn or aib or tadlis, even if the month passed, and this defect was in it before he purchased it, he has the right to return it. Of course, he has to prove this. That's why he says, ما لم يوجد دليل الرضا. As long as there is no dalil, evidence present يوجد دليل الرضا that a person is pleased. So the buyer if the buyer comes after the period that they agreed that he can return it in this period, he came afterwards and he says no, the merchandise have a defect in it. And the seller, if he proves that he did something to show that he was pleased with it, knowing the defect in it, and he was pleased with it, then he does not have a right to return. So that's why ما لم يوجد دليل الرضا. So دليل الرضا also can be different from one situation to the other. The urf also has its way in this, and there can be many different examples in this. He used it knowing the weakness in it. Not that he used it and he discovered the weakness or the defect and he returned it. No, he realized that there's a defect in it and he kept on using it with the defect in it. So therefore the al-khiyar here becomes invalid. So his choice, he does not have a choice anymore because he was pleased with it. He accepted it with the defect in it. Right? So خيار غبن وعيب وتدليس على التراخي. So the مسألة here, it's على التراخي. So even if it passes the shart or the time period. ما لم يوجد دليل الرضا. As long as there's no evidence that he was pleased with it. Clear? But there's an exception. إلا في تصرية فثلاثة أيام. Except in تصرية. Except in the تصرية, which we talked about, which is tying the udder of the animal for the milk. That specific example, he has only 3 days to return if he finds a defect in it. Or he was deceived because the udder was big, but the owner was he tied it. But only 3 days. Why? Because there's a text here. The Prophet ﷺ specifically mentioned for that specific example, he says, فهو بالخيار ثلاثة أيام. The Prophet ﷺ, when he talked about لا تسروا الإبل والغنم, do not tie the udders of the camel and the goats when you're selling it. And he said that فمن ابتاعها, whoever purchase it, فإنه بخير النظرين. Whoever purchase it, he has the خير, this is the خيار. He has بخير النظرين, he has the choice of both. But when بعد أن يحلبها, after he milks the camel, right? He milked it, right? So then after that, either he wants to keep it or he wants to return it. Because he won't know that it has a defect till after he milk it, and then he would wait. And usually, as they say, with the camels and things like this, if a person purchase it, and it takes 3 days or so for the animal to get used to the other place and the milk for it to come at ease. So that's why he has only 3. After 3 days, that means he's pleased with it. So he cannot return it after 3 days. And if he milks it, the Prophet ﷺ, he said if he returns it, even though he got the milk and he benefit from the milk, he can return it, but then he has to give صاعًا من تمر. He has to give a صاع from dates in return of the milk that he used, because he had to milk the camel. So again, to give the rights of the seller, but then in the hadith, فهو بالخيار ثلاثة أيام. Prophet ﷺ said that فهو بالخيار. He has the choice for 3 days. So that's why the mas'ala, when we see here, which it says إلا في تصرية فثلاثة أيام. Can we make analogy and things like this? No, because it has a nas, it has a text here. So anything else, it is على التراخي. That means it's not tied to the time. As long as he proves that it was before he purchased it, and as long as he did not agree to it. Right? So this is in the case of disputes, of course. إلا في تصرية, except the تصرية, then he has only 3 days. And when we go by the text and the nas, there is something that can be beyond what we know, right? Because for someone to make qiyas or analogy, it has to be exactly as the same case like here. And this is, you can talk about it in many different ways, the wisdom behind, as we said, the camel or the cow or whatever, it takes 3 days for it to go to another place, to get used to the other place, to be able to have milk and so on. So then he would discover the problem in it. After that, it's a sign that he's pleased with it. But then there's no need for analogy also. Why? Or qiyas? Because in anything else, if he's pleased with it, that means he doesn't have a choice to return. Right? So the tasriya is mentioned 3 days. Clear? So this is not a separate type. This is just shows that all the khiyar has a limited time except these three. It's على التراخي. And you word على التراخي, uh, maybe we mentioned it in Hajj. Is Hajj على الفور أم على التراخي? Hajj is obligatory على الفور or على التراخي? على الفور. على الفور means immediately. Or على التراخي, you can delay it. So if you have the means of Hajj, and the means now, the means as the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, الزاد والرحل. You have the provisions for yourself, for your family, till you come back, and the means to go and back, and then الرحلة, the amount of the transportation, and then you can add to it the visa and all of these types of things. So if you have the means, and you did not go for Hajj, it's obligatory immediately if you have the means. It's haram to delay Hajj, to say, no, I'm going to do it, inshallah, after 5 years. Yes, some of the ulama said it's permissible, but the correct opinion, Allahu A'lam, that it's immediately. But the word here is, the point here is على التراخي. Right? Is it على الفور, واجب على الفور immediately, or على التراخي? And you would find some of the rulings that comes like this. Is it obligatory now, or there is leniency with time? You can delay it. Like if a person woke up at after sunrise, he woke up for he missed Salatul Fajr. He woke up after sunrise. So does he have to make Salatul Fajr immediately? Yes. But he can delay it for the benefit or for the need that he need to, like for example, he woke up, right? And already the sun already had risen. So he can go to the bathroom, he can take a shower, things like this. And if there is a need that he can take care of that need and then he prays, it's okay. And that's why, because the Prophet ﷺ, when they woke up after the sunrise, the Prophet ﷺ ordered them to move from that place. So they moved first and then they made the salah. But anyway, so this is the word at-tarahi. And you have a rope and you let it loose. When someone you want to have the dog is in the leash, right? And he let it loose. This is arha al-habl, arkhaytu al-habl. That means I made it loose. Whether it's for the horse or for whatever there is. Then after that, وَخِيَارُ عَيْبٍ. وَخِيَارُ عَيْبٍ. This is now it's going to get a little bit, not complicated, but it has some calculations here. Right? So he says here, وَخِيَارُ عَيْبٍ يَنْقُصُ قِيمَةَ الْمَبِيعِ. Let's read the first sentence. Say وَخِيَارُ عَيْبٍ ينقص قيمة المبيع كمرض وفقد عضو وزيادته. Okay. Here another type of خيار عيب. العيب is defect, something wrong with the merchandise. This is خيار عيب. So here is the problem is in where, in what we call the merchandise in Arabic. المبيع. So the problem is in المبيع. التدليس, the problem was in what? In the thaman, in the price. He did something to increase the price, right? Al-ayb here, there's something wrong with al-mabi' itself. So وَخِيَارُ عَيْبٍ يَنْقُصُ قِيمَةَ الْمَبِيع. This ayb, this defect, ينقص, decreases the qima. Qima here is the value of al-mabi', the value of the good or the merchandise, right? And be careful again, in fiqh, in any other matter, of course, they're very precise. So here, it says قيمة المبيع. Al-qima is the value. Before in the tadlis, we said thaman. Thaman is the price. There's difference between the price and the value of the good. Very clear. So here this al-aib, or the defect, decreases the value of. Because you might have purchased it, the price that you paid might be even less than what this merchandise is worth. But it has a defect in it. Its value is more than what you paid, or the value of it is less than what you paid. So there's difference between the value of it and the price that you paid with, okay? So here, وَخِيَارُ عَيْبٍ يَنْقُصُ قِيمَةَ الْمَبِيعِ. So this is the definition of خيار or the عيب or the defect that decreases the value of the merchandise. As an example, كمرض, like مرض, like a disease, sickness in the animal or in the slave or whatever. وفقد عضو, فقد عضو is an organ. فقد means it's lost. An organ is gone. The animal doesn't have a leg or doesn't have a hand or something like this. وزيادتي or extra عضو, extra finger, extra, something that is a defect. People don't want to have it like this. So this is خيار عيب. So as you see now, you see the difference between the tadlis and the عيب. The tadlis is there's no defect in the merchandise, but he makes it seem to be more expensive. But al-aib, that means this is a deficiency in it, this is a defect in it, right? Whether the seller knows or it doesn't know, it doesn't matter. If he knows and he still sell it, it's haram on him if he hides it, of course. But maybe he doesn't know. So there's no sin on him, but he's still, the buyer has the right to return it back if it has a defect in it. So كمرض وفقد عضو وزيادته. Clear? Then he says, فإذا علم العيب خير بين إمساك مع أرش أو رد وأخذ ثمن. Let's say it. فإذا علم العيب خير بين إمساك مع أرش أو رد وأخذ ثمن. Here فإذا علم العيب. If he got to know knowledge, he had the knowledge of al-aib. Al-aib is the defect. He got to know the defect after he purchased it. He purchased the car, then after he purchased it, you discovered that there's a defect in it that would decrease the value of the car. Like what? If it's the car. The car had an accident. Something, right? Because if it had an accident, it would decrease the value of it versus that it doesn't have, never had an accident before. Something like this. So if he got to know the aib or the defect after he purchased it, then he has the choice, meaning the buyer has the choice. خُيِّرَ, this is what خُيِّرَ means. This is in the passive tense referring to the buyer. خُيِّر, from al-khiyar. خُيِّرَ, he will be given the choice. بين إمساك, between إمساك, this is the choices that he have. إمساك مع أرش. إمساك مع أرش. إمساك is to withhold. So he has the choice to keep the merchandise, but then he has al-arsh with it. And al-arsh is basically a portion of the value of the merchandise that he can have it in return of the defect. Right? So, and we'll see how that works, how that to be calculated. So this is what al-arsh means. The word al-arsh is the differences in the value. The differences in the value, and that's basically the differences between that good or that merchandise. If it's has no defect, what's the value of it? Versus with that defect, what's the value of it? The difference between both, this is the arsh. So the buyer has the right, if he chooses to keep it, he keeps it, and to be given money in return of that defect. And it has a very specific calculations to it. So, but we'll see here. This is the first choice. Right? This is إمساك مع أرش. Clear? إمساك مع أرش. أو رد وأخذ ثمن. أو رد. The other choice is to الرد. الرد is to return. Is to return the merchandise and to take his الثمن. الثمن is what? Is the price, not the value, the price. Because the price meaning that what he paid. So either he takes the arsh while keeping it, which is the difference, or he returns it and he takes the price of what he paid. And so this is um, yeah, رد is to return it. So أو رد وأخذ ثمن, or to return it and to take the price. وإن تلف مبيع أو أعتق. نعم. طيب, before we continue, it's important to know the arsh here. And since there is قيمة and there is ثمن, there is value and there is price that you paid. So say, for example, here, let's give an example with a car. A person purchased a car that has a defect in it. And the buyer realized that this is a defect. So he wants to keep it. He has a choice either to return it and to take his money, or he wants to keep it, but then he takes the arsh. How to calculate the arsh? Al-arsh here is, now someone of expertise would say that this car, if it's the like of it with the same year and everything like this, if it doesn't have this defect in it, it's worth 1,000, for example. But with this defect, it's worth 500. It's value, right? Regardless of what that person paid. So what's the difference between the one that is not having a defect versus the one that has a defect? The ratio is what? Which is the value, half. So now you're talking about ratio or percentage. So the value of it would decrease to half because of this عيب or because of this defect, right? So it's not a price, it's the value. The value goes to the half of it. Now we look how much that person paid. If he paid 3,000, right? So he's entitled to how much back? 1,500. Why? Because it decreases by the half. You see the difference between the qima and the thaman, the value and the price. Clear? Because this will come in the next some of the masail here. So then he says, okay, I'm looking at the matn here. فإذا علم العيب خير بين إمساك مع أرش أو رد وأخذ ثمن. This is clear? Clear? طيب, and then the next statement, وإن تلف مبيع أو أعتق ونحوه تعين أرش. وإن تلف مبيع. المبيع is the merchandise. In تلف, a telef is when it get ruined. You know, if it's ruined or it's broke or something happened afterwards. You know, that a person, it happened after he purchased it, that it got ruined. Get ruined while it has a defect. So he purchased the car with a defect in it. But while he was going to return it, he made an accident. So now the car is no good. Totaled. Right? So what is for the buyer? He doesn't get anything because he made an accident. So this is the mas'ala here. Do you understand the mas'ala? وإن تلف مبيع أو أعتق, or the slave was freed. Right? ونحوه, and the like of this. So then what does the buyer get in this case? تعين أرش. تعين, that means becomes mandatory. الأرش, that means he get the arsh. He still get the arsh because he paid more than what it's worth, even though the merchandise is gone, it's lost. Is it clear? Because that's the only choice that he has, because it does not exist anymore. He cannot return it and take the money back. So that's why he only have the choice of al-arsh. If he forgives, it's up to him. But he has still the right of al-arsh. Clear? So that's why if you read it, if you don't write a note or something like this, and you look at it later, you might not remember this meaning. Because what is وَإِن تَلِفَ مَبِيعٌ أَوْ أُعْتِقَ وَنَحْوُ تَعَيَّنَ أَرْشٌ. It means you have to know that it got ruined after he purchased it. Because this is when the subject of al-khiyar, we're talking about already the good is already purchased. Right? We're talking about after the contract. So since he has the choice whether to return it and to take the price, or to keep it with the arsh, in this case, if he ruined the merchandise himself, meaning the buyer, he's only entitled to the arsh. Is it clear? Again? So the first matter was a person purchased something with a defect. He goes back to the seller and he says, I want to keep it with the defect, but you give me the differences in the value. And we talked about how to calculate the value, right? So the seller will give him the differences and he keeps it. The seller might say, no, I'm not going to give you anything. Then return it. I'll give you your money back. And the seller cannot say no because there's a defect in it, right? So the other case here, وَإِن تَلِفَ مَبِيعٌ, that means the person, he purchased a car with a defect. The same case. But then before he returned it to the seller, he broke the car in a different way, different than the defect in it. Right? He again, as an example that I said, he's going back to the seller to return the car because it has a defect. He makes a accident and he totals the car. The car is completely ruined. So what does usually people would do? Just that's it. He lost everything. No, in this case, he's only entitled to the arsh. Why? Because he cannot take his money back because the car is gone. So he cannot ask for the money back because of the defect that it had. And the car now is totaled, even though he purchased it with the defect. So he can still entitle to the arsh, which is the differences between the value of the car when it's not having a defect versus his car that he purchased with a defect. So he would still go to the seller. And in that case, in that example that we said that if he can get half of the price, then he can have the half of the price because it was already with a defect. If he can prove that, of course. See? This is then وَإِن تَلِفَ مَبِيعٌ أَوْ أُعْتِقَ, meaning the slave is freed, وَنَحْوُهُ تَعَيَّنَ أَرْش. The arsh becomes, then this is the only choice. Fardu ayn is fard upon each one, every person. So this is a ta'yin here. That means this is a specific, only for him is the arsh. He says, وَإِن تَعَيَّبَ أَيْضًا خُيِّرَ فِيهِ بَيْنَ أَخْذِ أَرْشٍ وَرَدٍّ مَعَ دَفْعِ أَرْشٍ ويأخذ ثمنه. وإن تعيب أيضا. Here the another عيب or another defect happened by the, getting complicated, right? We understand the first two cases. Hopefully, inshallah ta'ala, make it easy, inshallah. وإن تعيب أيضا. That means now the guy, he purchased the car with a defect. He makes a defect in it. Who's the one that made the defect in it now here? The buyer, right? The buyer did something to cause the car to have another defect. It's not total, it's not ruined, but has a defect, made an accident. But the accident is not a big deal, right? So what is the case? How to deal with this situation now? The car has the first defect and now a second defect. But the second one happened by the buyer, not by the seller. So what to do? خُيِّرَ فِيهِ. He would have the choice, خُيِّرَ فِيهِ بين أخذ أرش ورد مع دفع أرش. And the other choice, ويأخذ ثمن. That means he has the choice either to take his first arsh, right, because it already has a defect, and to return it, and he would pay the arsh that he caused by the second defect. So it's twice it has to be calculated because this first defect can be different than the second defect. Right? So it's the first defect has a value or took the value of the card to the half of the value of it is gone. The other one is 1/4, for example. So he can take the first arsh and then he will have to give to the seller his arsh because he caused it to have a defect. So either that choice, and he would take then what he paid. Or the seller has a choice to refuse. Since there was a first defect, he has to at least give the arsh of the first one because he sold it with a defect. All right? So this is easy, right? Is it clear? So that's why it says وَإِن تَعَيَّبَ أيضا, and made it تعيب. That means the عيب or the defect already it becomes or happened after he purchased it. That's why وَإِن تَعَيَّب. So العيب, the first one is already he purchased it with a defect. Here وَإِن تَعَيَّب, that means he caused the defect. The buyer caused another defect to it. أيضا again خير فيه, he would have the choice in it, بين أخذ أرش ورد مع دفع أرش ويأخذ ثمن. Either he takes the أرش and that's sufficient for him. So this is the two choices is what, again, according to the sentence here, that he would take his arsh and that's it. And the seller has nothing to do with the second defect. So the seller gives the buyer the defect, the arsh of the defect that he sold it with. Or waraddin, if he wants to return it, he doesn't want to take the arsh. He wants to return it to the seller. So that means waraddin مع دفع أرش. So he has to pay the arsh then, ويأخذ ثمنه, and then he takes what he paid. Clear? Is it clear? Anybody doesn't understand? Or people, we lost them? تعين, that means it becomes تعيب, that means على تفعل. That means something happened extra, which is to make it different from the first one. So it became another defect. He made it. I'm having difficulty with the English. What's the verb of defect? He made a defect, right? Because تعيب, العيب, تعيب, all of it from the same word, but how to say the defect is he made a defect. He purchased it with a defect and he made another defect. That's the significance of وتعيب أيضا, which is another one. Clear? طيب. Should we go to the next one, or that's good enough? Sure.
Decides to return it بعد option. How is that calculated? First, he would calculate the ratio of the original people. No, they wouldn't do that.
He's returning it, so he's entitled to have his arsh, right? But he has to pay the arsh of what he did, because the guy now is going to take his car with the defect that it has it before, and now a new defect in it, right? Versus the first defect, and that means this would decrease it with a certain value, and then so the value of it, instead of being 1,000, it was already 500. So then to calculate the second defect that made it down to whatever value, then he has to pay that defect to the seller if he wants to return it, because he made a defect. So now there is arsh on him, arsh on the buyer, after the first arsh is calculated.
Let's say the $500, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to pay let's say 250 because it was half that value.
Mm-hmm.
Then would he just give you have to give the 500, then he gives you the 250 from that?
It can be subtract. Yeah, this can be, yeah. If it's more or less, no.
The arsh has to be like based on market, or is supposed to be
No, based on the value of the market, yeah. Yeah. Like, for example, a simple example of that is how the car's values are. The fair value of the car, for example, something like this.
a bad car, maybe on the market is 2,000.
Right.
And 1,000 has to be.
Right. But the value, not the price that he paid, the value of it. Right. And inshallah, we'll stop here and read it, inshallah ta'ala, and try to digest it. And if there's anything, we can talk about it again, inshallah. Let's take the hadith. Is ready. عن سفيان بن عبد الله رضي الله عنه قال قلت يا رسول الله قل لي في الإسلام قولا لا أسأل عنه أحدا غيرك قال قل آمنت بالله ثم استقم. رواه Muslim. So Sufyan ibn Abdullah radiallahu anhu, he said, قال قلت, I said, يا رسول الله, O Messenger of Allah, قل لي في الإسلام, say to me في الإسلام, in the religion of Islam, قولا, قولا, a speech, a statement, لا أسأل عنه أحدا غيرك. لا أسأل, I won't ask about it anyone أحدا غيرك, other than you. That means very clear, very precise. I don't need to ask anyone about it after you, O Prophet of Allah. Like he wants a simple, precise words that he doesn't have to ask anyone else of what it means. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said, قال, قل, say, آمنت بالله ثم استقم. Say, آمنت بالله, say, I believe in Allah, then istaqim, then be upon the Salat al-Mustaqim, be upon the straight path. And that's the entire deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in these two words. إن الذين قالوا ربنا الله ثم استقاموا. And that shows this is their success in this life and hereafter, in these two words. Those who said, our Lord is Allah, ثم استقاموا, then they were steadfast upon the straight path. تتنزل عليهم الملائكة, the angels that come down to them at the moment of death. ألا تخافوا ولا تحزنوا, no fear, no shall you grieve. So the two words, آمنت بالله ثم استقم. آمنت بالله, the belief in Allah, the matters of belief, which is the unseen. And it shows that al-istiqama upon آمنت بالله, which actions and halal and haram and so on, all of that is part of al-iman. Then be steadfast upon this. Don't change, don't contradict yourself. Whether it's negating it completely, right, or to weaken it by not fulfilling what amantu billah brings as a necessity or as a result of saying amantu billah. Because again, and you see how the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, the words are very precise and they would understand what it means. And you don't have to have that lots of explanations to it because it's very clear. So if this is all what he needs, that means actions are part of al-iman. Because it's not about something in the heart, as people say, as long as you have belief in the heart, then it's okay, this is what is needed. That means all of the wahy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Quran and the Sunnah is of for play, or what is it for? So, and since it's amantu billah thumma istaqim, be steadfast upon what you said, amantu billah. So to believe in Allah, this is matters of belief. To also to be obedient to Allah, to stay away from haram, which is part of al-iman. Then to be steadfast upon this, al-istiqama, not to be once in a while, but to be steadfast upon this and always repenting to Allah and so on. So this is one of the comprehensive hadiths of the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام. قل آمنت بالله ثم استقم. بارك الله فيكم وصلى الله وسلم وبارك محمد وصحبه وسلم. سبحانك اللهم ربنا وبحمدك اشهد ان لا اله الا انت استغفرك واتوب اليك. اذان ان شاء الله.